Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're trying to get our heads around one of the big paradoxes, really, of recent history. What was daily life actually like under a centrally planned socialist system?
Yeah, we're looking specifically at Romania, Arad County, and trying to square that feeling, that subjective memory many people have that, everything was better back then with the cold, hard numbers.
Exactly. It's memory versus the statistics. Our mission is to explore that gap because people don't live statistics, do they? They live their daily lives.
Precisely. It's about human experience versus macroeconomic reality.
Right.
And our sources let us do both, step into a family's life, then pull way back to see the bigger economic picture they were part of.
Okay, let's anchor this with a specific family,
Yeah.
the Simo family. They seem to represent kind of the ideal of that era's working class, don't they? Disciplined, hardworking.
Very much so. The father is quoted saying something quite profound, something like, "I am pleased to exert myself and work for them," meaning his family, so that they have everything they need. Real dedication there.
And skill, too. Let's talk about the mother, Mrs. Sophia. She was a wood turner, apparently incredibly skilled.
Oh yeah, the source mentions this amazing piece. She made a metal cube, perfectly turned on a lathe. But get this, inside it, there's a smaller rotating cube, also metal, all shaped from the same single piece.
Wow. That's incredible precision. Almost a metaphor, isn't it, for finding skill and maybe freedom within tight constraints.
I think so. And their daughters were high achievers too. Journalism, math, hairdressing, factory work, a picture of, well, stability and aspiration.
And this image, this feeling of stability, is right at the heart of why, as the source says, even 30 years on, many people from that time still feel almost everything was better. That's the feeling we need to unpack.
It's the core puzzle. How does that feeling square with the economic data that shows, frankly, a system in decline?
Yeah.
Let's try and build that bridge.
Okay, let's start with money. What was in their wallets? We do see salaries going up, nominally at least.
Yeah, the numbers show growth.
Yeah.
In Arad County's industry, the average net salary, it went from about 1,100 lei in 1965 up to nearly 2,700 lei by 1985.
So more money on paper, though Arad was slightly below the national average. Right.
Consistently, yes, about 97% of the national average in the 80s. But the real kicker is what that 1985 lei was actually worth.
Right. Context is everything. You did a calculation for us.
Yeah, if you translate the average Romanian salary in 1989 into, say, 2016 US dollars for comparison, it comes out to only about $421.
$421. That's really low. Puts the internal growth figures in perspective, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, especially when you throw in inflation, which sometimes hit like 18%, and an income tax around 13%. The pressure was significant.
Which makes this next bit almost unbelievable. The savings paradox. You found that in 1985, the average savings per person was, what, 6,742 lei?
That's right. And remember, the average monthly net salary then was 2,827 lei, so people were saving on average more than double a month's pay.
How does that even happen? In a normal economy, that doesn't make sense. Why hoard cash?
It's the classic sign of a broken command economy. It wasn't saving for a rainy day or a big buy. It was forced saving. You had the lei, but there was often nothing much to buy.
Ah, so the shelves were bare. The money piled up in state banks because you couldn't spend it meaningfully.
Exactly. It's scarcity creating a massive artificial savings culture, suppressed inflation in its purest form.
Okay, but what about fairness? Income inequality. Maybe that played into the better back then feeling.
Well, there's something there. If you look at the minimum wage as a percentage of the average wage, it peaked in the 1970s at around 65%, much higher than the 45% it was in 1950, or roughly where it is again today.
So the 70s might have felt more equal, economically compressed?
It likely did. A stronger sense of shared circumstance, perhaps. But, and it's a big but, connect that to the overall standard of living.
How? What do the spending habits show?
Well, look at food. In 1979, the urban population was spending a staggering 45% of their income just on food and drinks.
45%, just to put that in context for you listening. In Western Europe at the same time, it was less than a quarter. That Romanian figure is more like, what, a 1930s middle-class budget?
Pretty much. It suggests a persistently low standard of living, despite any perceived wage growth or equity. Modernization promises, but half your money still goes on basic sustenance.
Okay, so major income pressure, especially on essentials. What about bigger things like housing? This was a major state focus, wasn't it? The building program.
Oh, absolutely. Quantity was the goal.
Mm.
The state built a huge number of homes, 98,175 in Arad County alone, between 1950 and 1989, mostly two-room apartments.
And this meant more people owned their homes, or at least weren't renting compared to the West.
Yes, that's true. Access was prioritized, but it was definitely quantity over, well, quality or comfort. The living space was really limited.
How limited?
Arad was actually a leader in Romania in the late 80s, and even there it was only 14.3 square meters per person. Compare that to, say, 25 square meters in Czechoslovakia at the time. Cramped.
But affordable, presumably? How did the costs work?
The pricing made it possible. A two-room flat in the early 70s was maybe 78,000 to 80,000 lei, and the state offered these very long-term CEC bank loans, up to 25 years. So ownership was achievable, even if the space wasn't great.
But centralized construction brings its own problems, right? Bureaucracy, quality.
Oh, massively. There's that fantastic, if frustrating anecdote from the sources. 3 specialists on site, 30 in the office.
Huh. That says it all, doesn't it? Expertise bogged down in paperwork while the actual building suffered.
It could, tragically so. Remember the 1970 building collapse on Kokoriler Street? 15 people died.
Oh, I read about that. Faulty concrete, defects ignored.
Exactly. And the official response, minimal press coverage. A brief report, sentencing a year later, it shows the priority was protecting the system's image, not public safety, really.
Chilling. And they had big plans that never materialized, too.
Yeah, like the huge urban plan for Kalea Urel Vlaicu in Arad, drafted in 1988. Over 2,300 homes, swimming pools, cinema, ambitious stuff. But it all just vanished after the regime change. Lost potential.
Okay, let's shift from the structure of life to the texture of it. Scarcity. The sources really hammered this home, don't they? It wasn't about price, it was about finding things.
That's the absolute key difference. The banana example you mentioned earlier is perfect. A rare treat, then. Cheaper than apples now.
So prices for essentials were low, 3 lei for bread, 4 for a liter of milk, but that was almost irrelevant if the stuff wasn't there.
Precisely. Those low prices just guaranteed shortages. If you wanted anything desirable or status items, you hit the black market. And a Alain Delon coat, 2,700 lei, jeans, maybe 800 to 1,400 lei.
But the real currency, the stuff that made the unofficial economy tick, wasn't even lei, was it?
Nope. It was Kent cigarettes, 100 lei a pack in coffee, 105 lei for half a kilo. That was the real hard currency.
Currency for favors.
Absolutely. Needed a doctor quickly. Needed a bureaucrat to find your file. Kenton Coffee opened doors. The state's failure created this whole parallel system based on bartering these specific goods.
And the official commerce system was just broken.
Wildly inefficient. There are examples like state stores selling cooking oil by weight, by the kilogram, not the liter.
Wait, how does that?
Well, a liter of oil weighs less than a kilogram, about 10% less. So by measuring by weight, they were effectively shortchanging people on their rations. State-mandated shortchanging.
Unbelievable. And the inventory management.
A disaster. You couldn't find summer dresses in April, but the shops might be full of identical, outdated gray suits nobody wanted.
It sounds incredibly frustrating.
So frustrating that apparently, in the 80s, they actually ran vocational courses in politeness for shop workers. They had to teach basic courtesy because the default interaction was just stressed out staff dealing with desperate customers.
Yeah. Hey, what about getting around? Public transport was cheap, right?
Yeah, only half a lei for a ticket. Very affordable. But owning a car, a Dacia, that was a different story.
Or expensive.
The price, 70,000 to 90,000 lei, was steep, maybe 6,000 to 8,500 euros in today's money. But the real cost was the wait. You needed, as the source puts it, a lot of patience to get one legally.
Why? Were they just not making enough?
They were making them, but exporting them was the priority. Selling Dacias abroad brought in hard currency to pay off Săiescu's debts. Satisfying domestic demand was secondary.
Again, the needs of the state trumping the needs or wants of the people. Okay, let's broaden out again. Infrastructure. Were there areas where the state did deliver?
Yes, definitely. Electrification's a huge one. In Arad County, it went from just 13 villages having electricity in 1944 to 269 by 1985. That's massive progress.
And gas networks, too.
Yeah, the length of the gas network increased 8-fold over a similar period. These were big, visible, collective improvements. The state was good at that kind of large-scale project.
But not so good at individual connections, it seems, like telephones.
Right. Communication lagged terribly. By 1985, Arad County had a landline penetration rate of only 9.74%. Think about that, less than 10% of households.
And even if you had one, the privacy wasn't guaranteed.
Not with the coupled telephone system. You shared a line with a neighbor to get a cheaper subscription. But the catch, your neighbor could just pick up their receiver and listen to your entire conversation.
So surveillance, almost built into the infrastructure by default.
Intentional or not, that was the effect. And speaking of control, The main tool was television, of course.
Expensive to buy.
Yeah, even a locally made black and white set was 3,000 to 4,000 lei, a hefty sum. And by the late 80s, the programming was just relentless Ceausescu propaganda, nonstop.
Which makes that Dallas anecdote so bizarre, showing a glossy American soap opera about capitalist oil barons in 1980.
It's a fantastic contradiction, isn't it? A glimpse of the outside world of wealth and intrigue right there on state TV amidst all the anti-capitalist rhetoric. What were they thinking? Maybe trying to show capitalism's decadence? Or just a miscalculation?
Hard to say, but it highlights the weirdness of it all. Okay, let's pull back for the really big picture now. How did Romania stack up against its neighbors just before the system collapsed in '89?
The comparative data is pretty stark. We mentioned GDP calculated at purchasing power parity, or GDP PPP, earlier.
Remind us again what that means for you, the listener, in simple terms.
It's basically the best way to compare real living standards, because it looks at what money can actually buy locally in different countries. And by that measure, in 1989, Romania was dead last in its region.
How bad?
A GDP PPP of only about $3,000. They'll look at other things. Green production per hectare, way lower than neighbors. Protein consumption, second lowest in Europe, just above Albania, at 38 grams daily.
And cars. We mentioned the Dacia situation.
The numbers are shocking. Only 50 cars per 1,000 people in Romania. Compare that to Austria right next door with 366 per 1,000. The export focus just drained the domestic market.
So a clear picture of economic regression, especially in the 80s.
Absolutely. Romania had kind of caught up to its pre-war 1938 level by about 1970, but the 80s were a disaster. The global oil crisis hit hard, and Firescu's obsession with paying off foreign debt led to those brutal austerity measures.
Like the power cuts.
Exactly. Crippling power cuts imposed across the country, even though households only used about 5% of the total energy. It was a decision that deliberately sacrificed living standards, pushing them back to 1970s levels just to pay off debt.
But we have to balance this bleak picture with the source of that contentment we started with. There were improvements, right?
Yeah.
Especially earlier on.
Yes, and the Human Development Index, the HDI, shows this. The HDI includes life expectancy, education, standard of living, and it essentially doubled in Romania between the pre-war era and 1980.
So real, tangible social progress, better health, more education, basic stability.
Absolutely. That early socialist period delivered on some fundamental quality of life promises compared to the interwar years. And that progress, that memory of things genuinely getting better for a time, is likely the bedrock of that nostalgia people feel, even though the final decade was so grim.
It's complex. We also need to touch on the darker side of state control, the impact on specific communities, like the Hungarian minority in Arad.
Yes. The sources note a deliberate policy to weaken their cultural institutions, closing down the prestigious Hungarian high school, for example. It was an attempt to break the pre-war bourgeoisie's influence and speed up assimilation.
A clear example of totalitarianism trying to erase distinct identities.
It was. But there's an interesting footnote. Because Arad is so close to the border, people had access to Hungarian TV. That constant stream of uncensored culture and information from Hungary actually acted as a brake, slowing down that forced assimilation. Geography provided a defense, in a way.
So, bringing it all together, the Simo family, their contemporaries feeling things were better, what's the final verdict?
Well, it seems daily life was this incredibly strange mix. Real social gains early on, electricity, basic housing, better health things people remembered positively. But overlaid, especially in the 80s, with grinding scarcity, economic decay, inefficiency, and that constant invasive state presence.
The objective data clearly shows a system failing, a standard of living falling behind. But the subjective memory latches onto that earlier stability, maybe the perceived fairness of the 70s, the guaranteed job, the accessible, if cramped, housing.
Yeah, the positive memory seems rooted more in the predictability and security, however flawed, of the 70s, rather than the harsh reality of the late 80s. The state provided a framework, even if it was crumbling.
Okay, let's leave our listeners with a final thought. It comes from a Polish professor, Ryszard Legutko, reflecting on what happened after 1990.
Right. He observed something fascinating, that many former members of the Communist Party adapted, well, remarkably well to liberal democracy. They quite quickly became defenders of the new system, the new orthodoxy.
Which raises a really provocative question for you to think about. The communist economy collapsed. The political system officially ended in 1990. But did the socialist way of thinking, that reliance on connections, the expectation of state provision, maybe even certain methods of control, did that truly end? Or did it just put on a different uniform?
Something to ponder indeed.